Welcome to the Business for Good podcast, a show where we spotlight companies making money by making the world a better place. I'm your host, Paul Shapiro, and if you share a passion for using commerce to solve many of the world's most pressing problems, then this is the show for you.
Hello and welcome to the 88th episode of the Business for Good podcast. Man, did we get a lot of feedback on the last episode with the president of Oatly. A lot of you folks wrote in via our website, businessforgoodpodcast.com, to say that you personally invested in Oatly and are praying, yes, literally praying that the stock goes back up. I hear you. And others wrote in to give their feedback that they enjoyed hearing from a publicly traded company as opposed to the earlier stage startups we often feature on this show. Well, this episode is about another kind of early stage startup, but not a for-profit company. Instead, we are featuring a newly founded charity called Family Empowerment Media that was born out of the effective altruism movement. We have featured charities in the past on this podcast. In fact, our episode with New Harvest CEO Isha Datar remains one of the more popular episodes. Go check it out if you didn't hear it. It's episode number 42. And while it is a charity, Family Empowerment Media tries to run like a business in that it relies heavily on measurable, evidence-based strategies that produce a significant return on their investment. Though the return that they're seeking is not a financial one, but rather is in the form of the social change they are working to create, mainly by empowering the use of family planning by millions of families that are seeking to have fewer children in the developing African countries. Started in the year 2020, the sole mission of this group is to create radio content featuring Nigerian families talking about their positive experiences with family planning. Not only are donors backing these social entrepreneurs, but so is the Nigerian government. Why? Well, on average, fertility rates in Nigeria stand currently at more than 5 children per woman. Generally speaking, the poorest countries tend to have the highest fertility rates, while wealthier countries have lower fertility rates. So while in many African countries, each woman has on average more than 5 children, in wealthier parts of the world like South Korea, Taiwan, and Japan, each woman has on average less than 2 children. The U.S. is also at less than 2 children per woman. However, immigration to the U.S. prevents the country's population from shrinking. Now, these disparate fertility rates have huge consequences, since smaller family sizes typically correlated with higher quality of life, both for the mother and for the children. Small family size is often associated with better health outcomes, better educational outcomes, more gender equality, and so on. But here's the thing. It's not that women in the developing countries necessarily want to have so many children. In fact, nearly a quarter of women in the developing world want to avoid pregnancy but don't use contraceptives. That results in 85 million unintended pregnancies per year. Not only does this put women in grave danger of maternal mortality, but such high fertility rates often doom families to inescapable cycles of poverty because of the burden of caring for so many children. And in Nigeria, you might think that there's a lack of contraceptive access, but that's just not really necessarily the case these days. In fact, in Nigeria, just 5% of married women said physical access was a reason that they don't use contraceptives. Lack of familiarity with contraceptives and concerns about the side effects are far more likely to deter contraceptive use. For instance, Family Empowerment Media cites a study in 2 Nigerian states finding that almost 1 in 3 women believes that using contraceptives can make a woman permanently infertile. So, enter Family Empowerment Media with the goal of using radio communications to dispel these myths and empower women to take control of their bodies and choose both if and when they add children to their families. I've often viewed family planning, both in the developing and developed countries, as one of the most effective ways to help make the world a better place. Sadly, I just don't often see that many for-profit companies innovating in this space, leaving much of the social entrepreneurship to nonprofits like Family Empowerment Media. We did discuss male contraceptives in episode 61 with Your Choice Therapeutics, and we're going to do an upcoming episode on that topic too. But for now, enjoy hearing about a new charity's cost-effective work to put reproductive control in the hands of women who need it the most. Christina, welcome to the Business for Good podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I have been following your work since the inception of your new organization just a couple years ago, and it's exciting. And I am somebody who's particularly passionate on this issue for a lot of reasons, and I have struggled to figure out whether there are for-profit companies that can be helpful in this respect. And I know there's a good nonprofit organizations doing work, and you are one of them. So why don't you just tell us a little bit about what you're doing with the Family Empowerment Media before we get into your background? Like in a nutshell, what does the organization actually do?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, we're a new nonprofit. We produce radio campaigns to address myths and misconceptions about contraception. We're started around 2 years ago, and we now reach 5.6 million listeners in Northern Nigeria with our programs.
Great. And just so to be clear, how many million did you say?
5.6.
5.6 million people who have heard your ads so far. Cool. Well, congratulations. That's great. So before we get into this good work that you're doing, Anna Christina, what led you here? So, if you look through your background, you obviously are very sustainability minded. You have spent your life trying to do good in the world. You even co-founded a for-profit company called Fornix in Norway, where you're from, to try to help prevent and treat mental health issues. And now this. So what was it that led you to think, hey, instead of going from, being a for-profit founder of a company, I want to actually start my own charity?
Yeah, so I would say, from a young age, I've thought a lot about, what I can do to have the largest impact possible in my career. And, originally I was thinking that could be in the for-profit sector. And that's kind of where this work with Fornix came in. And I do think that is a very impactful path. But as I got more involved in the effective altruism community, started thinking more thoroughly as well around, doing work which is cost effective and really evidence based that impacts the lives of the most vulnerable, I made the transition. So my first encounter with the family planning space was when I was in high school. And I spent the summer where I did some research on the sociocultural barriers to family planning uptake in Tanzania. And I learned about, I suppose, how bad it can be for families not to have the information needed to navigate choices around reproductive decisions. And that definitely made a big impact on me. So as I was thinking more about, how I can have the largest possible impact, I came across the Charity Entrepreneurship Incubation Program, and they had spent a full year doing research into the family planning space. They researched around 180 different ideas, and they recommended that a new nonprofit were to be started working on mass media and specifically radio. So for me, a lot of things kind of came together there with the focus on the cost area and also the fact that they needed a founder within the space. So those are some of the things that made me transition.
So you were already a part of the effective altruism community when you were thinking about this. And so basically the idea was presented to you saying, hey, here's what we think is a white space in this area, essentially doing radio ad campaigns. And so you then filled that white space. That's what you're saying?
Yeah, and the type of things that they looked at during that research project was for interventions that are particularly cost-effective and evidence-based. And I think another thing with this intervention is the fact that it is very scalable. You can just reach a lot of people through a single channel. Those were some of the things that made them recommend the intervention.
Okay, so for those who aren't familiar with this space, Anna Christina, why does it matter? So people are not using contraceptives. They are using contraceptives. Why does this matter for the world?
Yeah. So, when it comes to family planning and specifically the work that we're doing, what you're seeing is an intentional behavior gap. So you have, families that are looking to space or limit the number of children that they have, but they don't have access to the information or they're blocked by other things. And this matters for a number of reasons. One of them is, it might be important for people, or it is important for people to be able to make those really important decisions with access to information. It has a huge impact on mothers' health, and it has a huge impact on children's health, and in general, a lot of other things as well that kind of is related to the fact that it's so fundamental to the family and the society.
Yeah. So you're doing this work in Nigeria, and I want to get into what your actual content of the ads are saying. But let me just first ask you before that, like, how do people get access, let's say in Nigeria, to contraceptives, and why Nigeria?
Yeah, so we chose Nigeria through a very analytical process. We kind of started out completely neutral about where we were going to bring this intervention in. And we looked at about 70 countries and model things out to look at where we could have the largest impact and where the intervention was the most needed. So Nigeria was shortlisted as one of the top 5 countries, and then we broke it into 5 regions because Nigeria is huge and it's quite different in different parts of the country. So those are some of the and the things we were looking at in that location selection was, what is the state of the maternal health there? What are the actual bottlenecks? Is there supply to contraception? And then what's the cost of operating in the different regions? So the north of Nigeria just stood out as a very good place to work from all of those angles. In terms of where people access contraceptives in the region that we work, a lot of that is through public clinics. So there is some availability of commodities there.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so, to my understanding, Africa has on average the highest fertility rate per woman in the world. Is that right? Meaning the most births per woman in the world.
Yeah. In the state that we work, it's over 6 births per woman. And then,
right. And so what would you say is the concern that you're trying to address? So if women are having on average, 5 or 6 children throughout the course of their life, what is the problem that you're trying to address here?
Well, it is the fact that when women have access to the information, all the information that, they might want to have access to make decisions about their fertility, that they should have that access, and then the impact that has on maternal and child health that sort of come from that. That is the issue that we are addressing.
Okay. And how right now, when you think about like the barriers to contraceptives for women, let's say in Nigeria, like what is it that is preventing them from gaining access to contraceptives and reproductive freedom?
Yeah, so before we launched our pilot, we did a lot of research to identify those barriers. And some of the things that came up are, for example, fear of side effects. So in the region that we work, 62% of women are either unsure or they think that they can get cancer from using contraception. A lot of people, around the same percentage, believe that it can cause sterility. There are other things like lack of spousal communication, for example, that women are not comfortable discussing these things with their husbands, and stigma that are also preventing uptake. So yeah, those are things that we are addressing with our content.
So how are you addressing them? Like if I were in Nigeria and I turn on the radio and I hear, excuse me, and I hear one of the family empowerment media ads, what am I going to hear?
Yeah, so we have 2 forms of content. We have our campaigns are really intensive. So one of the things we have are the short format shows, which are 60 seconds long ads, which includes 2 characters discussing an issue and bringing forth a message in that short form. So those are generally quite knowledge specific, and they go on air 10 times a day. And then we have our long form shows, and they last for 20 minutes. And we have a range of different formats. So we have call-in shows where people call up and ask their questions. And then we have experts that answer them directly on air. We also produce serial drama for this next rollout that we're producing. So for that one, you follow actually 3 families over an 8-week or 8-episode long drama. Where you have different characters that are encountering new information and integrating that, and finally, start using contraception in many of the cases. We also have celebrities and religious leaders and other important role models on air for different forms of shows. Yeah.
Great. So I know that you're a very evidence-based organization. So what are you doing to ensure that before you spend your money running these ads, that they actually are going to be effective in increasing contraceptive use?
Yeah, so our format is based on the best available evidence. So we spent a lot of time figuring out, what type of format does seem to be the most impactful when producing these types of shows and these type of campaigns. And then we do a lot of prototyping as well, and we look for early indicators of behavior change. So that are like obvious things, like people understand them and they can retell the message, and they get the right things out of the different shows and ads. But also things like putting them on air and testing how many have actually told their friends about this, for example, and then longer term to measure the more long-term indicators. We're doing larger surveys, and we hope to do an RCT in the coming years too.
So what is the result? Like, I'm sure you have anecdotal results from women who are using contraceptives who may not have otherwise used them, but what are the results? Like, have you found that, for every ad that you run, a specific number of people's behavior has changed?
Yeah, so one of the things we did during our pilot was we worked with a call center, and then for every ad, at the end of every ad that we ran, we had the name, like the number of that call center, and then we were able to track, how many people called in, and partly that was to learn, what type of material resonates more, and we should also spend more resources on in the future. We found that the call center got 5 times more calls from that. So those are some early indicators. This pilot was primarily, targeted towards learning to improve the content more, and then, but all of the leading indicators look really good. Are the way people also rate our shows in terms of how entertaining they are and how much they learned from them are between 8 and 9 out of 10. So that's also another quite promising early result.
Nice. So how cost effective is it then, Anna Christina? Like, in order to run these ads, you're reaching over 5 million people. Like, how much have you had to spend to have that type of reach?
Yeah, it's a very cheap program per person. It costs us $14 for 1 minute of airtime. So our best.
Sorry. So 1 minute of airtime reaches how many people?
So that reaches the audience base of 5.6 million listeners.
So just to be clear, $14 to reach 5.6 million people?
Yeah, it's a very cheap. It's very cheap. We do get really good rates because we have a good relationship with the radio station, and they're giving us some discounts for doing these types of programs, given the fact that they are beneficial for the health of the community. So yeah, we have our best estimate for long-term cost effectiveness is $2,600 per life saved. And those are based on the results that Development Media International had on their RCT in Burkina Faso, with discounts on sort of generalizability and so forth.
And so whose life is saved for those $2,600? The life of a mother who would have died during childbirth, or the life of a child who would have died in poverty? Like, what is the life that is being saved there?
Yeah, so that's actually only taking into account the life of the mother. It's if you think about the risk of dying as a result of an unintended pregnancy, that's sort of what we're looking at, and then the number of unintended pregnancies that are averted.
Yeah, it does seem to me like the benefit, obviously that's a very good benefit, but because high fertility rates are so highly associated with being trapped in poverty, that by working in this realm with this type of an intervention, you may be the good that you may be doing may be much more than preventing maternal deaths, which is of course a good in and of itself, but to help people escape poverty and have a higher quality of life seems like like 100% of the time that your work is having an impact, that's an impact that it's having.
Absolutely. If you take into account all the benefits of the family planning intervention, it does start looking quite ridiculously cost effective. Also thinking about things like the impacts on education as well. And there's also a lot of evidence showing the impact on health of children and undernutrition, even just from spacing, like increased spacing between pregnancies, reducing the risk of children dying before the age of 5. There's all these additional benefits that if we model them, it would be like even more cost effective.
Yeah. So let me ask you something, Anna Christina. I'm sure you get asked often. So you're essentially a Norwegian who is running a program trying to help Nigerian women have fewer children. Is there an optical problem for you here in terms of whether or not there are Nigerians running this program? I know you have a lot of Nigerian input into the ads, and that the people who are in the ads are Nigerian themselves. But is this a criticism that you have come under? And if so, how do you respond to it?
Yeah. So, we have a model, like we work directly with local partners in the communities that we operate in. So that basically means that we identify a grassroots organization, an organization working in that region. And then we are doing the whole project sort of with them. So we sort of stand for a lot of the research work, and then we involve stakeholders in that whole process. So that's been a way for us to make sure that we do this stakeholder engagement well, and that we make sure to not make any mistakes in that regard. We also have a partnership with the Ministry of Health in the region that we work. So they review all our material and give us input on that before it goes on air. So, the thing is, we haven't been asked from anyone like in Nigeria about this. And I think that's because the health benefits are just so obvious to the people in the community. I guess that's what I have to say about that.
Sure. And why women only? Like, is there not a possibility for vasectomies? If there are families that already have had a couple kids and they don't want more, is there an option for male contraception here?
So it's very uncommon in the region that we work to have that. Quite a bit of our material is targeted towards men. I would say maybe 40%. And in terms of having male characters that take part in the dramas and so forth. We actually don't encourage specific methods in our radio shows. We encourage our listeners to go to the primary healthcare clinic, where they can get more information about what methods might suit them best. So, and then we just assume that, at the clinic, I suppose you'll have like the general distribution of what methods people choose there.
Mm-hmm. And is vasectomy one of them? So I know you said earlier that there is a common misperception among folks in the region that using contraceptives could have side effects. I was reading that there are some people who were basically saying if you put in an IUD, it can move around in your body and harm you, and other myths surrounding some of this stuff. But for male contraceptives, obviously condoms are one option, vasectomies are another. Are those things that are popularly used in Nigeria?
Yeah, condoms as well are very uncommonly used. It's something we've thought about, if we should have more material that presents some of these other options. This show here, we're launching a 9-month-long campaign in about a month. And one of the shows, we sort of give more in-depth information about 5 methods. Those 2 are not amongst them. But I suppose there is some potential to do some more communication on those methods too.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So this is, it seems like very important work, obviously, Anna Christina. And I'm wondering, like, how much money has your nonprofit organization raised so far? And how much do you think that you need in order to effectuate the goals, which I presume would be seeing tangible reductions in fertility rates? Is that what you would say the goal is?
Well, I would say the goal is to, support women to realize their family planning intentions, and that does result in fewer unintended pregnancies. And then, an effect of that is improving maternal health and child health and many other things. We've raised around $500,000 in total. And we're looking. The thing about our intervention is that it is very, very scalable. So funding is definitely one thing that is, if we, our projected budget for the next year is around $850,000, which would allow us to also start scaling up in 3 other locations. So having access to that amount of funding would allow us to, scale our programs up a lot more. And then over time, over the next 10 years, we have this path to, spending around 10 million a year, which would allow us to work across a lot of, or all the countries in Africa where we currently think this intervention would be cost effective to deal with the specific problem.
Sure. And how many folks work right now at the organization?
So it's about 6 people who are hired directly to Family Empowerment Media, and then we work with a bunch of partners within Nigeria too. So depending on where we are in the process, for example, during actual production, there's a lot of people, and during our surveys, there's a lot of people. We can be up to maybe 25 at most. But then, once those specific projects are over, it's the 6 of us that is sort of hired directly.
Cool. So let me ask you then, this seems like, obviously a problem that requires some nonprofit organization interventions like what you are doing, but there obviously is a connection to the for-profit realm. Obviously, the contraceptives are being paid for by somebody and being produced by some company. So do you think that there is a role, or more of a role, for the private sector in the for-profit space to be getting involved in family planning in the developing world? And if so, what do you think those companies are? So if you're going back and you're thinking, I'm going to found a company, not just a nonprofit, but a company to start addressing family planning issues, what do you think are some of the white space opportunities for entrepreneurs out there who want to do something to put an oar in the water and help advance family planning?
Yeah. So, in certain regions, there is still a supply issue. So, we work only on the information and, I suppose, the demand side of things. And there are a lot of regions that, if we could go in there and have our programs on air, and they would actually have access to commodities, that would be really impactful. But currently, there's just not. So that might be, that's a problem to be solved. Whether that is, something that a for-profit could do, and in terms of how, the additional barriers to starting a for-profit in that space, I'm not quite sure, but that's definitely a problem. I suppose as well, improving some of the commodities that are available, and for example, it's an issue in some of the regions that we've considered working in where there might not be enough health workers that are trained to insert some commodities, and then maybe developing something that could be a bit easier to use, that are also not having too many impacts on hormonal systems and so forth. So I think there's some, and I know there's some exciting work on that R&D front too. That might also be a space for a for-profit, maybe.
Yeah, we had on the show some time ago a Y Combinator-backed company called Your Choice Therapeutics, which is basically trying to develop male contraceptives because, right now it's basically condoms and vasectomies, and neither one of those are often that popular with men. And so the question is there something else that could be maybe less invasive or less inconvenient? And so it does seem like there is a technological white space here, and to create more options for male contraceptives. There's also, and we're going to do an upcoming episode on this, no scalpel vasectomies now, which are basically, you don't have to actually cut open the scrotum. It's a much less invasive operation to do. And so hopefully advances in those type of techniques will also lower the barrier that some men may face to, or that some men at least may perceive to be an active part of the family planning themselves.
Yeah, that's really exciting. I'm definitely excited to see the future of those types of solutions.
Yeah, cool. So, in the family planning world, or maybe even not, are there any companies just that you wish existed? Are there any things that if you were going back and you weren't running this, you think, hey, maybe this is a good company, or you're thinking, you hope somebody listening will start this company to do something on this issue that would be helpful?
Yeah, so I think there's quite a lot of potential in thinking through solutions to like improve, social interactions. I think having more people connecting. I can imagine just enabling that in a better way with especially like people in cities. I think that's a space that I'm pretty interested in. I'm very interested in the clean meat and like the future of that. I would love to see more work. I mean, this is definitely something your listeners and a lot of the people in your show has been or are working on. So those are also spaces I'm excited about. I would also say that starting a for profit and being a part of Founders Pledge, for example, and giving away money when exiting or at a point after having earned quite a lot of money is also a very impactful thing that I think it would be exciting for listeners to consider.
Cool. Yeah. And just for folks not familiar with the Founders Pledge, it's basically an initiative where entrepreneurs commit prior to making their fortunes that they'll donate a portion. I think is it 1% or is it more? I forget what it is, but there's some pledge to give away some portion of what you may make if you ever have a successful exit. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah, cool. Of course, the irony is that most startups fail. So a lot of these, founders who make these pledges won't have anything to give. But those that do might have spectacular amounts. So hopefully they will stick to it. It's not a binding pledge; nobody can sue you if you don't fulfill it. But hopefully, the social pressure of having publicly committed to doing it will lead you to be a little bit more charitable once you make your millions. So maybe those founders who exit will be listening to this today and think that family empowerment media is the thing that they want to support. So if that is the case, Anna Christina, how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, please get in touch. Maybe we can put my email in the description or something like that. If you're curious, you can also visit our website, and definitely keen to talk to people who are excited about our work.
Okay. Well, we'll put your email in the show notes for this episode, which is going to be at businessforgoodpodcast.com. And finally, Anna Christina, there's a lot of people who may be impressed by what you're doing. They're psyched to see somebody who started her own organization and is doing good in the world already so quickly. So have there been any resources that were helpful for you that you would recommend to those people who are interested more either in this space or in anything that's been helpful for you in your journey?
Yeah, I would say maybe I have two pieces of advice. I suppose one of them is just taking all the opportunities you have to, learn the skills needed to start something. So that could be, early on taking on volunteering opportunities and really learning about how different organizations are run. It could also be internships at organizations that you are where you're really impressed by the impact they're having. So that's one thing, just taking on the big opportunities for growth. And then the other thing is to, read read a lot maybe and try to learn through there's such a wealth of information of good books that allows you to get an insight into an issue, and just being self driven and seeking out those that knowledge, I think can really enable you over the long term to get a really good understanding of different fields.
Are there any books that are particularly useful for you?
Yeah, I would say one book I really love is Poor Economics. It's just a very evidence-based and practical description of what we actually know about what works to address some of the big challenges for the global poor. A big fan of the Lean Startup and Principles of Ray Dalio. I think they're both great books for people who are looking to build organizations, especially learning organizations. I would say that one of the things for us as an organization is we've had this very strong, lean startup, I suppose, methodology being used from the beginning of just, once you get started, identifying what is the big thing that you have to validate or learn in order to get to the next stage. And then going out and doing that right away. So if you're going to fail, you're going to fail fast, and reducing the uncertainties of the work quickly. And then finally, maybe so want to recommend The Life You Can Save of Peter Singer, or any similar books to that as an introduction to effective altruism.
Great. Well, we've had Peter Singer on the show before, and we'll link to that episode as well for folks who want to check it out at businessforgoodpodcast.com. And I have read, or at least heard of, all the books you mentioned, except for one. So for those of you who also maybe have not heard of it, I'm just going to restate it. This will be in the show notes too, but it's Poor Economics, a radical rethinking of the way to fight global poverty, which looks like a really interesting book. And I am putting it on my to-read list as well. So thanks so much for that recommendation, Anna Christina. And thanks to you for all that you're doing to try to make the world a better place. Really grateful to you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening. We hope you found use in this episode. If so, don't keep it to yourself. Please leave us a 5-star rating on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast. And as always, we hope you will be in the business of doing good.